I'm a native of Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Left there at a very, very young age, at the age of 4 or 5, 1963. What happened was my father, who was a high school math teacher at the time, got his master's degree in mathematics from the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. So he was hired by NASA in Huntsville, Alabama, where Marshall Space Flight Center is. So we moved from Arkansas to Alabama, where my father worked with the German scientist Werner von Braun. So he was an engineer there at NASA. So I don't know if you picked up on that. We moved from Arkansas to Alabama.
Wow.
Are y'all following me?
Yeah.
Arkansas, further south to Alabama. 1963.
Bad times.
A lot of blacks were leaving the South, going up north for better job opportunities and trying to get out of the way of segregation.
Right.
My father moved his family further south to George Wallace territory. And as a young boy growing up in Huntsville, Alabama, I had a chance to witness and experience some things as pertains to race relations, segregation, some things that I'll never forget that to this day. And I have there's 4 boys in all, so I have 3 siblings. My oldest brother's 5 years my senior, retired Colonel in the United States Army. I'm the second one. I'm a retired officer from the United States Army, retired back in 1996. Then my youngest brother, 5 years under me. My father was a mathematician. You see that? 5 years, 5 years, 5 years. And then about 5 years my junior, he is a pastor of 30 years. And my baby brother, 10 years my junior, he's a PhD physicist. He graduated from high school with a D-.
Wow. Go figure.
So it's how you finish that race, right? What matters the most, not how you start the race. And so that's a little bit more about me. What I want to talk to you about tonight and share with you, because I think you agree with me that it is a blessing that President Trump won that election, the last general election.
Absolutely.
As a matter of fact, the way I like to put it, I believe that God has given us a reprieve.
Yep.
He's given us some time to get it right so we can really save our nation.
Amen.
And so the question is, what are some things we have to get right? My opinion is this: the key to victory, the key to stopping socialism, the key of getting President Trump reelected will be all about messaging. Messaging. I mean, from us in the grassroots level, we got to learn how to message. In other words, we got to learn how to get in the trenches where we are, how to engage our family members, our friends, people in our precinct that we come in contact with in stores, lady walking here serving us, how to engage them and inspire them to vote for saving America and vote for President Trump.
Yes.
You agree?
Yes.
Yep. Messaging is huge. But when it comes to messaging, as conservatives, we are terrible at that. And why are we terrible? It's not because of our message. It's because of our messaging. Is that me? Let me turn my eyes off to Ventura Range first.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. Like music.
Okay. Yeah. So I can put that on you now. Put my.
Not mine either.
So we have to learn how to do that. How do we? Because now keep in mind, because the left has they really want you bad, don't they? You're good. Okay. I'm just kidding. Is he coming in here?
He is.
Okay, I'm letting him come on in. Come on in. How you doing?
All right, I'm sorry. We've been waiting on you.
The more the merrier. The more the merrier.
Love your shirt.
What I was saying, when it comes to messaging, reason why we're doing such a reason why we're not effective, because the left has demonized the word conservative so badly that before we get a chance to speak, we have already been discredited and we're on the defense. When you say the word conservative, people will attack you. They will attack. They have, I hate to use the word masterfully, but the left has masterfully demonized that word. Back in February, there was an article that came out in Politico. Politico is an online left-wing news source. It is a rag of a news source. February 4th was that article. In that article, they talked about in the Democrat Party, there is a faction called Justice Democrats. And they're going after the leadership of the Democrat Party. The spearhead, the voice piece for Justice Democrats is AOC. Okay? So AOC is leading the charge in the Democrat Party to seize the power of the Democrat Party from Nancy Pelosi, Chucky Schumer, and John Lewis. Justice Democrats. This article that I'm referring to, they were interviewing AOC's chief of staff. And in that article, guess how he described Nancy Pelosi, Chucky Schumer, and John Lewis? Conservative Democrats. Now you got to tell me on which planet is Nancy Pelosi, Chucky Schumer, and John Lewis Democrats? They're not. They're not. What the left understand that when you can pin the word conservative on someone, it automatically brings up opposition and hatred toward that person, where now you have control of the narrative. That's what they're doing to us. You follow me?
Yeah.
So the question is, how can we overcome that? How can we win this narrative? How can we trump the race card, pun intended?
Yeah.
Tonight, you're going to have answers. You're going to have answers to that dilemma. You're going to know how to win the narrative and trump the race card.
Yeah.
You're going to know how to create an atmosphere for political dialogue where you can share your conservative values, win the narrative, and win the person you're talking to, and get them to vote their values. Follow me? You think I can do that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Have you ever heard of the answer on how to trump the race card?
No.
You will tonight. You will tonight.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I'm going to get into it right now. Through the ministry of the Apostle Paul, God has given us the blueprint on how to trump the race card. Okay? When you go back and you study the ministry of the Apostle Paul, now, Pastor, if I'm wrong, you let me know that I'm wrong.
You're not going to be.
Okay? You let everybody know when you see that I'm wrong, okay? I'm counting on you to do that. I don't need you to be my amen corner.
My amen corner, I like that.
When you study the ministry of the Apostle Paul, before he became a champion of Christianity, he was also well known for being a bloodthirsty murderer and persecutor of Christians. Am I right, Pastor?
Yes, you will.
The Gentile nations knew that. His murderous reputation preceded him. You follow me? Then Paul had his Damascus Road experience when he was transformed in his thinking and his beliefs. He was a new person. And he went around telling people about his transformation. He was a new man. You follow me? Now, allow me to use my biblical imagination. What was some of the talk of the Gentiles about Paul and his murderous past? If I can just imagine the talk went along these lines. Look at Paul. That no good liar calling himself a Christian evangelist. He's not a Christian evangelist. He's uncaring. He's insincere. He's a bigot and a racist. Any of those words sound familiar?
Yeah.
We face it all the time, don't we?
Yeah.
Paul, no good lie. He's not fooling anyone. He's over here want us to become Christians so he can murder us too. Whew. So the question is this: how did the Apostle Paul overcome the negative perceptions that the Gentiles had of him? How did the Apostle Paul trump the race card?
Yeah. Pretty hard.
He did two things. Two things. Number one, he had a testimony. He talked about his transformation. Now, he did not only quote Jesus Christ, he talked about how the teachings of Jesus Christ changed his thinking, changed his mind. He made his inspirational declaration. You follow me? As conservatives, we got to have a testimony. We got to talk about how we've been inspired and been enlightened by the light and the writings of Fredrick Douglass. I'll get to him in a minute.
There you go.
That's a testimony.
Yep.
I've been inspired by the life and writings of Fredrick Douglass. I agree with his life-empowering values: respect for the U.S. Constitution, respect for life, the belief in the limited power of government, economic prosperity, legal immigration, school choice, free speech, religious freedom, women's rights. Douglass wrote about all these things. You follow me? When I start talking about Douglass, you're going to get a clear picture why it'll behoove us to leverage Douglass. So we got to have a Frederick Douglass Republican testimony. Paul had a Jesus Christ testimony. When we deal with politics, we got to have a Frederick Douglass testimony. The second thing Paul did, he had good deeds. He was in the community doing things with them to improve their quality of life. He was healing the sick. He was ministering to them. He was with them. He was among them. He even brought one man back from the dead. So Paul, the Apostle Paul, had a testimony and he had good deeds. They both go together. You can't have one or the other. If you have one or the other, now your testimony comes across as a fake. Got to have both. Without works, faith is dead. All right? Got to have good deeds. President Trump has a lot of good deeds in terms of passing legislation that where now in the black community, the unemployment is all-time low. A lot of good deeds: criminal justice reform, empowerment zones in the black community. He has a lot of good deeds, but he's lacking a Frederick Douglass Republican testimony. Until you do that, you can't win the narrative battle. You got to have both of them. So you got to understand, as conservatives, and I mentioned before, that before we speak, we've already been discredited. So we're on the defense. We got to be on the offense all the time. Yep. Because we've been discredited so badly, nobody wants to hear what a racist has to say or a sellout has to say. They perceive us to be that way, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's not going to listen to that. It's not that we disagree with what you're saying. I'm not going to listen to you. So now you got a confrontation instead of conversation. Follow me? Now, why Frederick Douglass? Let me get to Frederick Douglass just quickly. Frederick Douglass, born 1818 in the Eastern Shores area of Maryland. You remember Frederick Douglass, man with the bushy afro.
Yep.
Frederick Douglass. The way I always put it, Frederick Douglass was born below poverty. Why? Because he was born into slavery. Slavery is below poverty. He was a slave for the first 20 years of his life. Never owned a pair of shoes until he was 8 years old. Never slept in bed to age 10. He was homeschooled, self-taught. A slave for 20 years. Douglass said on one occasion, he said, I prayed for 20 years to be free. Nothing happened until I prayed with my feet. I had to run away. Had to take some action. I'm waiting on God to move. God said, no, I'm waiting on you to move. He moved 20 years later. Let's fast forward a little bit. At the age of 20, 1838, he escaped from slavery on his second attempt. Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass had 0 days of formal schooling. Never been to school in his life. He actually started a homeschooling program for himself on the plantation to learn how to read and write. So by the time he escaped from slavery at the age of 20, he was able to read and write. Matter of fact, while on the plantation, he started a reading ministry to teach other slaves how to read and write as a teenager. He wrote 3 autobiographies, and he wrote a novel. I make this point because, based on my reading of history, 90% of Black Americans or African Americans could not read or write. He wrote 3 autobiographies and a novel. He was an advisor to 5 Republican presidents. 5 of them. Let's go through them right quickly. Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, James Garfield, Rutherford Hayes, Benjamin Harrison. Most folks don't get a chance to meet one president. He was an advisor to 5 Republican presidents. He was a self-proclaimed Republican. Douglas said on one occasion, he said, I am a Republican. A black die-in-the-wool Republican. And I never intend to belong to any other party than the Party of Freedom and Progress, referring to the Republican Party. Now, trivia question for you. Frederick Douglass, you can't answer, I know you know the answer. He and I met in the Villages last week. I've been in Florida now since the 19th.
Awesome.
Started off in Pensacola, Jacksonville, the Villages, Vero Beach, Miami, Fort Lauderdale. I'm here tonight, be in Bradenton tomorrow. And then, see, Florida's a major swing state.
Yes, it is.
I gotta get in Florida and get people trained in this message strategy, what you learned tonight. Anyway, Frederick Douglass passed away in 1895 at the age of 77. How much money do you think Frederick Douglass had in savings at the time of his death? You get 3 choices, 3 chances. The first 2 don't count. 300,000.
5,400.
Okay.
Million,
Nothing. How much?
million.
1 million. Now think about it now. He was
Back in
born
the day.
below poverty.
Right.
He was born, he started off as a sub-0 percenter. He was a slave for 20 years. 20 years as a slave. He didn't get paid for that labor. Okay? Frederick Douglass had $300,000 in savings at the time of his death in 1895.
Wow.
In today's money, that's over $11 million.
Wow.
That was the closest.
Yeah,
Go figure.
over $11 million today.
Wow.
So you can see that his life is really inspiring. So when I talk to people about the importance of liberty, what I've learned over the past 11 years doing this, a lot of folks don't understand socialism. They don't understand communism. So you got to explain what's going on to them in a different metaphor. I talk about slavery. And when I talk about slavery, I bring in Frederick Douglass and share with them what Frederick Douglass had to say about slavery. And the reason why you bring Frederick Douglass in, because no matter which victim category that Nancy Pelosi and the left try to put people in, no one today can out-victimize Frederick Douglass. Follow me? That's his life. Okay, let's put that to the side. Let's get to the writings of Frederick Douglass, because this is where, in terms of his writings, that gives us the leverage as conservatives to win the narrative. Follow me here. As you recall now, the founders gave us 2 magnificent documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Now, some of the founders owned slaves. When the Constitution was ratified, That's not when some of the founders freed their slaves. The slaves were freed in many cases after the death of the founder. So when it comes to liberty and the Constitution, the founders are tainted. And the left exploits that. These racist men who own slaves gave us this racist document called the Constitution. And we're always trying to defend that, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
On the other hand, Frederick Douglass, he didn't own any slaves. He was a slave. But when you get into Douglass's writings and in his speeches, he affirmed the founders and he affirmed the Constitution, and the left has no answer for that. Yeah. He writes with a former slave perspective. Frederick Douglass was not a racist. He was a victim of racism because he was a slave. You follow me? Give an example. One of the things Douglass wrote about the U.S. Constitution. Douglass said, quote, "The Constitution reads, we the people. It does not read, we the white people," end of quote. Douglass goes on to say, if blacks are considered to be people, then they should be benefactors of the Constitution. Douglass went on to say, the problem is not with the Constitution, the problem is in the application of the Constitution. Douglass went on to say, the problem is not with the Bible, the problem is in how the Bible is applied. So thank God we have this literary legacy of Frederick Douglass to refute the false rhetoric of the left and help us to win the narrative and trump the race card. You follow me? What I'm sharing with you is this. When you look at the ministry of Apostle Paul, the Apostle Paul was a diversity outreach specialist. Think about it. He was called and commissioned by God to take the gospel to whom? The Gentiles, people of different ethnicities. Those of us who are Gentiles, we are the benefactors of the Apostle Paul's outreach strategy. Think about it. By occupation, the Apostle Paul, he was an attorney and he was a tent maker. Am I right, Pastor? Yep. Got my amen corner going now. He was a tent maker. God called the Apostle Paul and commissioned him to establish a big tent. Big tent is a metaphoric expression for diversity outreach, diversity inclusion. What do we say all the time as conservatives? We got to have a big tent. In 1 Corinthians 9:22, the Apostle Paul lays out the first step to do diversity outreach. He said, I become all things to all people. Isn't that right, Pastor?
That I might become.
That's right. When you read some of the other translations, the Apostle Paul says this, in terms of the Gentiles, he said, I entered their world and I tried to experience life from their viewpoint. Yep. That's how I knew what to say. Wait a minute, K. Carl. What do you mean by that? Bring it to where we can understand this thing. All right, let me bring it where we can understand this thing today. If you enter my world as an African American and you try to experience life from my viewpoint, you're going to quickly discover the word conservative is not the language of liberty in our community. It is the language of oppression. If you say you're a black conservative, Reagan conservative, Christian conservative, because of negative propaganda, that's what you're saying, but because of negative propaganda, what people are hearing is black conservative, black racist. Reagan conservative, Reagan racist. If you say you're constitutional conservative or Tea Party conservative, guess what? You are a racist. And the attack is on. The attack is on. You follow me? So what happened over several years, I invented something called the Fredrick Douglass Republican Engagement Strategy. What happened to me was I was at a friend's home watching a football game with 18 to 19, 20 blacks. All of them were Democrats. The subject of politics came up that night. When I shared with them I was a conservative, the attacks began. They called me everything but a child of God. Sellout, foot shuffler, the house N-word.
Yeah.
all night long, Uncle Tom. I went home that evening thinking and mostly praying about how can I share my conservative values without the fear of racist name calling. How can I share my conservative values? First of all, how can I win the narrative to win my friends and inspire them to vote their values because they're really more conservative than I am. They just not voting that way. You ever heard the saying, necessity is the mother of invention? Yep. Because of necessity of being sick and tired of being called a sellout and Uncle Tom, I created this engagement strategy. So a year later, I invited those same black 18 to 20 Democrat friends of mine to my home to watch a football game. And the subject of politics surfaced again. When they asked me about my political identity, I responded by saying, I'm more than a conservative. I'm more than a Republican. I am a Fredrick Douglass Republican, and I believe in the life empowering values of Frederick Douglass. Respect for the Constitution, respect for life. I believe in limited power of government, economic prosperity, free speech, personal responsibility, women's rights, legal immigration. When I shared it with them, all of them started talking about how they were a Frederick Douglass Republican too. I got them. I had them. I know they do a skit at this point.
But did they swallow it?
Oh yeah, they swallowed it. Hook, line, and sinker.
Probably went out and said,
Oh, they got
I'm
it.
surprised he didn't get beat up, but.
No, but just by bringing Douglas into it, who you cannot out-victimize, and you learn what he had to say about those things, it's captivating. It's the hook. As a matter of fact, that's a good introduction to this, what I got here. I wrote this book. I always say that. I'm not here to hawk the book. Yes, I am. I'm going to hawk this book because I got to share with you what works. I wrote this book. This book came out in 2011. It's called Frederick Douglass Republicans, the movement to reignite America's passion for liberty. This is not a dissertation on the political thoughts of Douglass. It is a conservative action handbook. It's a book you need to teach you how to engage, how to talk to your friends, your family members, your family members who's going to come to your house around Thanksgiving time. Oh, and mercy.
Some don't come no more.
Some don't come anymore. We're going to fix that so they come again, right? So you can engage them. Okay. How do you engage them? Because now we got situations going on now when parents have raised their children to be conservatives. They go out and get that indoctrination. Now they're coming back and calling you a racist.
Yep.
How do you engage them? Where you win that narrative and bring some political healing to your family. It's in this book. All right? This card comes with the book. There are 10, we call these engagement cards. The book is for you. The card is for them. And when they get their awakening, they need to get a book. This card is called engagement cards. Has nothing about Republican or Democrat on it. It's talking about values. It says vote your values. In other words, vote in a way that shows your love and your allegiance to the God that you say you serve. And on this card are 6 life-empowering values. Now, you notice I didn't say conservative values. They are conservative values, but when you do an outreach to people, call them life-empowering values. You say the word conservative, they're going to attack. They're life-empowering values, which they are. The life-empowering values are immigration, personal responsibility, the U.S. Constitution, economic prosperity, educational school choice, free speech. And there's a quote from Frederick Douglass on each one of those values. So when a person reads what Frederick Douglass had to say, then the question is, do you share Douglass' thoughts on these life-empowering values? Been through this for 10 years. When people read this, over 96% of the people say yes. You got to help them to get the hook. Don't say, oh, now you're a conservative. Oh, now you're a Frederick Douglass Republican.
Right.
You follow me? So we got to learn that because of negative propaganda, that word conservative, I'm not saying stop using it, but you got to know when to use it and when not to use it. I can use it in here. But when I go to NAACP meetings, black church and get invited to speak, the word conservative doesn't come out my mouth. I learned that from the Apostle Paul. I got to speak their language. You follow me?
I do.
Make sense to you?
Yep. Absolutely.
I'm leaving anything out?
Tell them why conservative is a bad word.
Okay. Well, one of the reasons why conservative is the bad word because of the negative propaganda. The left has demonized that word so badly without an effective conservative response. We just let them call us that. We don't know how to respond. I'm gonna get to that in a minute. But there is something that, because remember when I shared about what happened to me that night with my friends when they started attacking me? I was curious. I said, what's going on? Why are my friends attacking me when I use the word conservative? I knew about the negative propaganda, but I said, is there something in history that occurred that I don't know about? And I need to research. Now, I don't have a PhD, but I've done some PhD level research in that regard. Let me tell you what's going on. 1964, President Lyndon Johnson, he signs the civil rights legislation into law on July 2nd. You remember now, your staunch, racist, segregationist, Democrat senators, they filibustered it, voted against it.
Yep.
Okay? For racist reasons. Because they want to maintain segregation in the South. Now, there was a certain Republican senator who also voted against it, but he did not vote against it based on racist reasons. He voted against it based on constitutional reasons. His name was Senator Barry Goldwater. Senator Barry Goldwater was not a racist. He was an integrationist. In 1948, in Arizona, he started the Arizona Air National Guard as an integrated unit. That's long before Truman integrated the military, the armed forces. 1953, it was Barry Goldwater who integrated the Senate cafeteria in our nation's capital, when one of his black legislative assistants was refused service. So Senator Goldwater was not a racist, but with his no vote, he sided with the racists. You follow me?
Yeah.
Now I'm going to connect two dots. Follow me now. Follow me. What was Senator Goldwater's? This is when the light bulb came on in my head. What was Senator Goldwater's nickname? His nickname, if you recall, was Mr. Conservative.
Oh, yeah.
What was the title of the book he wrote in 1960 that sold over 3 million copies? The Conscience of a Conservative. Now, to add insult to injury, at the 1964 Republican Party National Convention that was held in San Francisco at the Cow Palace, the Republican Party, the Party of Lincoln, the Party of Emancipation, who did they nominate as their presidential candidate to run against LBJ? Mr. Conservative, Barry Goldwater. When that happened in 64, black folks left the Republican Party en masse. My parents and many of my staunch Republican family members became Democrats because of that. Because of that. And ever since then, the Democrats have had control of the narrative. Here's the irony of this whole thing. The Democrat Party supported slavery in the South. It was the Democrat Party that wanted to expand slavery. It was the Democrat Party that gave us Jim Crow laws and started the KKK. They're calling us racist.
Yeah.
Well, Johnson said.
Yeah, Johnson said the same thing. Johnson was the leader of the Dixiecrats.
Yeah.
They called us racist. But what we have to do, we got to get control of the narrative back. How do we win that, K. Carl? You got to leverage Fredrick Douglass. Follow me? Make sense to you?
Absolutely.
This is a transferable skill. Matter of fact, this whole engagement strategy, the Fredrick Douglass Republican engagement strategy, it is more effective when a white person uses strategy, a Latino, versus the black person. It's more powerful when you use it than when I use it. Think about it. Through the media, what do we hear? White conservatives are racist.
Racist.
They will always be racist. They have no redemptive quality in their life. They're unlike a liberal who's pure and pristine. That's the mindset. Because we're losing the propaganda battle. But when the so-called racists come out and says, I hold Fredrick Douglass in high esteem. Matter of fact, I agree with Fredrick Douglass' life empowering values. You got to make it your testimony. That's a testimony. And stick to your testimony, because the left want to separate you from your testimony so they can attack you. Got to come from your heart. All this is political evangelism. That's what it is. I'm not pushing my faith, but what I'm sharing with you, when you look at Apostle Paul's ministry and his engagement strategy in terms of best practices from a strategic standpoint and tactics, it worked. It works.
You can't really separate it.
That's right. You got it. You can get the rest of my speech. But you're exactly right. So when you take the engagement strategy and the trump the race car strategy of the Apostle Paul, and you put that together with the liberty message of Fredrick Douglass, in my view, Fredrick Douglass is America's greatest liberty messenger. And he is the forgotten prophet. When you put those two together, guess what? Guess where the left had to go now? They got to go back to France. All right?
Absolutely.
So to be a Fredrick Douglass Republican, it's not based on color. To be a Fredrick Douglass Republican based on these values.
Yeah.
Respect for the Constitution. Respect for life. The belief in the limited power of government. Don't say I believe in limited government.
Right.
Don't say that, because when you say, I believe in limited government, the left's going to spin and say, oh, you want to take folks' entitlements away. I believe in the limited power of government. I like to keep more of the money that I make.
Yeah. Not that true.
Personal responsibility. It comes out of 2 Thessalonians. If a man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat.
Right.
These are life-empowering values. Do you share these life-empowering values?
Yes.
Guess what? That makes you a Fredrick Douglass Republican. It's not about color. It's about values. And I don't know if y'all know this. I just been recently contacted by the Trump campaign. I'm now on their coalition advisory board to the president. And so what I'm doing, because this is what I do in terms of what we do, my organization, I'm traveling the country, and I'm engaging grassroots conservatives, Trump supporters, teaching you all how to engage.
Thank you.
Because we got to grow a nationwide movement, if you will, of liberty messengers who know how to leverage the life and writings of Fredrick Douglass and employ the engagement strategy of Apostle Paul. When we do that, the left is out of here. They don't have an answer for this truth. But it's going to take you all to do it. I can't do this by myself. President Trump is doing his job. He's what he promised, he said he's going to do, he's doing it.
Absolutely.
The question is, what are you going to do? Waving the flag on the weekend, that's good, but it's not enough.
No.
It's not enough. We've got to learn how to talk to people. And we can't get President Trump elected until we win the narrative. We can't win the narrative until you know how to trump the race card. And you can't trump the race card until you get K. Carl's book. Now, the books are free. Listen to me now. The books and the cards are free. The autograph in the books and the cards is $20. That's my capitalism joke for the day. Yeah. Okay? In-reach outreach, okay. In-reach outreach. Let me talk about in-reach and outreach. I'm going to get to your questions. Okay? In-reach outreach. This is where the Republican Party does a terrible job. They always talk about they want to do outreach. They want to do outreach first. You don't do outreach first. Outreach is last. You do in-reach first. You remember in first chapter of Acts, when the Christ is with the disciples after 3.5 years of training them? He says to them, don't you leave now until you receive the power. What he meant by that, till you see the power of the Holy Spirit. Don't you go out there and do any kind of engagement till you receive the power. I'm sharing with you, don't you go out and do any type of engagement until you receive the power. You got to be trained. You got to get K. Carl's book. And he says to them, I want you to go to Jerusalem. Judea, Samaria are the parts of the earth. Am I right, Pastor?
Amen.
Right now, Jerusalem. Where is Jerusalem? Jerusalem is your home, your community, your precinct, your family members, your friends. You start in Jerusalem. Your Jerusalem is where you live. My Jerusalem is where I live, my precinct. You start there first. You practice on them to get the pattern down. You understand? Then you go to Judea. Where is Judea? Let's go a little bit further outside your community. Okay? Jerusalem, your precinct, your family members, your friends. Judea. Then he says go to Samaria. Where is Samaria?
People that don't like you.
Woo! People who may not look like you and they could be antagonistic. That's outreach.
Right.
Yep.
Now, listen now. God didn't say go to Samaria first. He said you start in reach. Outreach is Samaria. Then, by that time, you got the pattern down. Before you do outreach, you know how to deal with the pushback. Come on in. Come on in. Then you go to Samaria. How you doing? You coming just in time.
Better now.
That's right.
Now one more behind.
Well, thank you.
Glad to have you.
Glad to be here.
Thank you.
You got to buy us all a book.
He's a man, right?
Last one.
That makes sense to you?
Yep.
Absolutely.
There is nothing new under the sun.
That's right.
And what led me to really get into the Bible to understand the strategies of the Bible is a how-to book. And I just couldn't believe God left us with no answer on how to trump the race card, how to engage. He just had to reveal it to me.
Right.
So I feel like I won the lottery. Out of 350 million people in the United States, God has given me this message and this perspective. And my goal and my mission is to empower you with it. That sense of empowerment I had that night when I engaged my friends, my family members, I want you to experience that same sense of empowerment that I have today. So you can bring some political healing to your families. So you can get out there and engage. And create an atmosphere for political discourse without the fear of racist name calling. Okay?
Yes.
Paul did it. Paul gives us the guidance how to do it. What are your questions? Make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm just happy that you're teaching us how to do that. Many, many years ago, a person at my work started being really friendly to me, and we started going out to lunch every day. And she said, you're my best friend. But now, this is after we had been out many, many times. I'm going to tell you something that I'm going to trust you.
Okay.
I work for an underground Muslim organization that nobody knows about. And I would think about this. United States are haters. You came here from another country, and you shouldn't be socializing with these people. I can bring you underground, and I can show you beautiful things how to destroy the USA.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And
It's
I
called the
was
FBI.
sitting there, I'm
You're the
getting
right way.
goosebumps because that's what happened to me. I couldn't believe. And she said this organization was big. Okay? And nobody
Called the
knows
FBI
about it.
right away.
How long ago was it? That was about the Bush time, when the
Wow.
9/11 happened.
Wow.
And so I told her, you picked the wrong person. I wasn't born in the USA, but I became an American citizen, and this is my country
Yeah, yeah.
now. I am patriotic, and I love
Yeah.
this country.
Good.
So you should find somebody else. I wish I had more. I told her I'm very patriotic. I'm more patriotic than probably many Americans
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sadly.
And you know what? She never spoke with me again. I
Yeah.
even had gone to my original country, Brazil, and I brought a gift for her. She gave me that. She put that gift back to my office. I came back one day from lunch and I'm like, what is this?
That's pretty scary though.
And
Yeah.
That's pretty
she
scary.
was very, I mean, didn't want to ever, she couldn't even look at me. She never spoke with me again because I didn't want to become a Muslim. I was like,
Yeah.
Was she Muslim? Was
Yes, she was Muslim. She was actually from Jordania, right next to Israel there.
It's very interesting. I'm going to share with you one of the quotes from Frederick Douglass regarding legal immigration. It goes in line with what you're talking about. Remember at that time, 1800s, the Chinese were being brought to work on the railroad. Frederick Douglass, of course, at that time, he was a civil rights leader. See, Frederick Douglass is the father of the civil rights movement. Dr. King is the son.
Awesome.
Dr. King got many of his ideas and strategies from the writings of Frederick Douglass. So 1868, 1869, somewhere in that time frame, they asked Frederick Douglass, what do you think about Chinese immigration? In a speech entitled, Our Composite Nationality, Douglass said, this is the greatest country in the history of the world where you can come here because of liberty in our Constitution and you can rise from rags to riches. You can improve your quality of life if you apply yourself. In that same speech, Douglass says on immigration, there's a process. Here's the three things he said about immigration. He said, first of all, he said, quote, they must bow, become for his immigrants now, because Douglass believed in assimilation.
Right.
He said, they must bow to the same law, in a quote. Bow means a form of respect. He said, respect the rule of law. Douglass said, number two, they must learn to speak English. There should be one language for the marketplace. That's part of assimilation. Then Douglass said, number three, they must understand the first duty of citizenship, which is to what? Obey the law, and to value and understand the importance of our Constitution. That's what Frederick Douglass had to say. So by leveraging what this ex-slave had to say, that's where the left has no answer to it. And that part on immigration is in the book. And that quote from Frederick Douglass is not only in the book, it's on the engagement card. Carefully study to show yourself approved. You just can't use this phrase, Frederick Douglass Republican, and don't have content behind it to back it up. You got to know what you're talking about. You got to get into the writings of Douglass. You got to get K. Carl's book. Shameless plug. I'll make it easier for you. Okay? In the book, I identify 4 life-empowering values. I want to keep the book to a small, easy read. The book's less than 100 pages. I identify 4 life-empowering values, and I give you 5 quotes from what Frederick Douglass said about each one of them. Respect for the U.S. Constitution. Respect for life. The limited, now in that book, I use the phrase limited government. That I learned later, it's not the best way to go. It's the limited power of government. So in the book, you can see the phrase limited government. 5 things he said about that. Personal responsibility. So, respect for the Constitution, respect for life, limited power of government, personal responsibility. What Doug said about those 4 things. Those are core conservative values, right? They're life-empowering values. You got to be careful how to use that word. Matter of fact, back in November of last year, Rush Limbaugh, it was November the 28th, in the 3rd hour of his show, he said to his listeners, he said, quote, stop using the word conservative. He said, listen now, I'm not saying stop being one. He said, stop using the word because the left has demonized it. And you're into an argument now, and you're on the defense. Then Rush's solution was, he said, instead of calling yourself a conservative, call yourself a problem solver. I like where Rush was going, but that doesn't go far enough. Because eventually it's going to come up, the word conservative. The best way to leverage that is to refer to yourself as a Frederick Douglass Republican. I'm more than a conservative. I'm more than a Republican. I'm a Frederick Douglass Republican, and I believe the life-empowering values of Frederick Douglass. Respect for the Constitution. See how the pattern goes? Respect for life goes. Respect for life.
Right.
That's your what? Testimony. And the good deeds, we talk about what President Trump has done in the black community.
Absolutely.
Not just the black community, but for the whole economy. Y'all's 401k is doing pretty good, right?
Yep.
All right. Move the embassy to Jerusalem.
That was awesome.
Put up the wall.
Yeah.
Doug said on one occasion, he said the first duty of the federal government is not to provide for us. The first duty of the federal government is to protect us. Put up the wall. Nehemiah put up a wall.
Amen.
Yeah. Right. They gated community, right? Yeah. That's all right. Hypocrites, right? Makes sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll take gold, $20 worth of gold, $20 for silver, plastic, and cash. I got to get this in your hand. Now, if you go to the website, the card and the books will cost more than $20. But since I'm here tonight, and I want to empower you with it, put the books in your hand. Get one for yourself and one for another family member, and grow this nationwide movement.